Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sebastian, for bringing us always together. It's always a great opportunity. I will make an observation that links to the answer I'm about to give you. So many of the people in this panel, if not all, in previous years were making keynote opening remarks, etc. This year, you put us straight to work as a team. And I think this is what is changing. What is changing in cybersecurity is that we're moving from a situation where we observe and we preach and we talk about what we must do and according to what is happening to actual work. Here we are in a situation where we need to sit together, all the like-minded, public, private, across the world, global, and we need to deal with what we are faced with. And what we're faced with is a completely changed threat landscape. We have some of the same challenges that we always had, but we also have a new situation, polymorphic, as you called it. A Greek word, please allow me to say that. And in Europe, we are polymorphic by nature, because in the European Union is 27 countries with a different morphology. So we know how to deal with polymorphic by trying to cover every single angle that is possible. So today's cybersecurity policy is not just about looking at the latest incidents, drawing some conclusions, and then saying, well, that's where we want to hit. It is about considering what's happening geopolitically. It is about considering what's happening above the sky, under the sea, drones, cables. It is about considering new technologies. The hype is cyber and AI. And I think for me personally, but also for Europe, this is the big reality check. So this is where we're waking up, that we can't do cybersecurity like we did before. So it's not just looking at the laws and putting a check on what our countries have done, but it's about putting our brains together on how we will use the technology, how we will make sure that what is out there serves security, and not it's not just another way of identifying the problems, but the best way to manage the problems, because this is the big question, I think, today. So we can only do that if we put ourselves together, because AI can make us go faster, but we need to keep an eye on it, exactly for that reason, because it can't go faster than us.
Thank you so much. Let's jump to you from a US perspective, from your lawyer's perspective. What has changed for you? What is different now? How are things accelerating?
Thank you. Thank you again, Sebastian, and all the team for having us. It's great to be back in Paris. We've got a large American delegation here. Mark Raimondi brought an entire team. I hope folks take the time and can collide while we're here in keeping with the spirit of this conference. I think maybe I'll start with what's the same. I think 2025, many of us concluded at the end of 2025 that it was advantage attacker. 2025 was an attacker year with the technological innovation. Did that help the defender? Yes. But I think we start 2026 with advantage attacker. Where are we after the first quarter of 2026? Advantage attacker. So I think that is consistent. That has not changed from what we're seeing. Questions are now being asked as to whether or not with this new tooling and the new capabilities, and I know we're going to get into this with some really exciting announcements just in the last 24 hours that Despina and her team have achieved with sharing these innovative technologies for the defender. We're hopeful that that happens rapidly, but we sit today, I think, in an advantage attacker situation. What's new? The technological innovation is rapidly changing our space. That's a truism. We can all say it. We'll talk about the details of that on this panel and throughout the next 36 hours. What has also changed, I think, dramatically is just in the last quarter, we have now seen the technologists ask the policy folks for guidance. The technology is currently being run on a private sector scaling model based upon private party contracting, and that is creating the regulatory norm for the behavior and use of those products. That's being challenged, not only by third parties. So in the United States, we have 3 branches of government, and we colloquially refer to the 4th branch as the media. Start there. We have media lawsuits that are still pending, challenging the foundation models for copyright and other violations of law. We have Congress actively pursuing serious questions and legislation associated with AI-related tooling in cybersecurity. There's a hearing this week on Mythos and the other models, including OpenAI's models associated with cybersecurity, and I know we're going to get into that. We have courts in the United States, federal courts, considering cases associated with claims that are being brought not under protected content, which is where a lot of the technology cases were, but in a very new sphere, which is the products are susceptible to challenge in their collection of information, but more importantly, in their use of information and how the products are used under product liability theories. That is that the products were misdesigned and they're causing harm to people. And that negligence and or strict liability can give rise to claims. So courts are considering this now in the US. We've got state attorneys general just in Florida in the last 24 hours filing a lawsuit against OpenAI, challenging it on those similar grounds. And we've got state regulators, the most important financial regulator in the United States, the New York Department of Financial Services, which regulates all financial institutions that operate in New York, including foreign banks, issuing AI guidance just in the last 7 days on foundational models. Then on civil society, we've got Amnesty International coming out just this week saying foundational models should all be banned and not be used because they are premised upon privacy violations due to scraping in violation of privacy principles in various laws. And so I think we have a normative change occurring now with a lot of actors really engaged on understanding the technology. And then finally, the technologists themselves are saying, with Dario leading the way, I'm not sure I know how to govern this technology myself. I have ideas about it. I have strong thinking around the normative standards that should apply to it, but I want to work with governments. And I'm going to hand that back to Despina to tell you what she's doing with respect to governments.
Before we go there, we go to Jacob. So Despina has some time to think about it. And Jacob, I mean, you are in touch with so many different companies, I imagine, in Denmark, so you probably hear a lot of things, but you also know the security field well. So when we talk about change from your perspective throughout the last year, from the company side, but also from the security angle side, I mean, also the Russian threat towards Europe and the world, what is different? What is accelerating? How are things moving?
I think one of the key, first of all, thank you so much for being here, and you, Sebastian, for making this event yet again. I think one of the things that has changed from our point of view is that instead of protecting systems, we are now protecting societies, because everything is so interconnected that the target is not a company, the target is not an institution, the target is the stability of society. And therefore, cybersecurity is, yes, it's still relevant, it's still something that we need to address, but we cannot do that alone. We need to talk more about cyber resilience, because the fact is we will be attacked. We are attacked every second of the day. If you work in finance sector, if you work in telecommunications, if you work in utilities, you know that the Russians are trying every second to break you down in order to affect our society, in order to affect our populations. So what we need is not only the cybersecurity, but the resilience. How do we stand up against this? How do we function as a society when these things shut down? Because they will. And I have a thing that I always say to the normal civilian people in Denmark, because security is something that many companies are aware of, many institutions are aware of. But if you meet with Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, they're not particularly aware of this. So I asked them, who is going to pick up the kids when there's no electricity and when the phone is not working? And they always look at me and say, well, that's not going to happen. Oh yeah, it will. And chaos will break out. And within 3 hours, our society will be a menace. And you need to have a plan. That's the way we need to build our societies, build our cyber resilience. So the changes are, in my view, two. Basically, it's not the systems, it's the society that's under attack. And the second, cybersecurity is not enough. You need to focus also on resilience.
Very briefly, what does resilience really mean for you? Is it software? Is it a tech stack, critical mineral access for hardware, operational security? What is it?
Yeah, it's everything.
It's everything.
Resilience is everything. Resilience is the ability for a society, for an institution to function when things go down. And you need to have, you cannot plan everything, but you can plan many things. And the more you plan, the more prepared you are. your plan will never ever work. I used to be an officer in the army, and you always plan, and the first time you meet the enemy, your plan goes down the drain. But you have thought through the scenarios. That is why we plan. That's how we work. So we need to plan, how do we, I mean, it's from a geopolitical point of view to begin with. Where do we get our critical minerals from? Do we dig under the ice of Greenland? It's 3 kilometers thick, by the way. Or do we get them from the Chinese? How do we adapt into this world? How do we react when our strongest, our closest ally, the ability or the willingness to support us when the enemy comes? I mean, all of these things must be answered, but also, how does my company work when the power is out? So it's a very big answer. I'll not give you the entire answer here.
But it's a perfect bridge to Daniel. How does my company work when electricity runs out? I'm sure you're working on similar things with your association. You're representing ACN, the French Federation of Digital Trust. From your perspective, on the company perspective, what has changed? But also, if you take out one concrete example of how the threat landscape is evolving, how would that look like?
Yes, thank you very much. Effectively, I represent on this somewhere the voice of the industry, because Digital Trust Alliance is a union representing French company, large group, small and medium company, startups in the domain of digital identity, cyber security, artificial intelligence, and trusted infrastructure, I would say. That means all the technologies that are developed in France to contribute to the trust in the digital world. And we are, say, the challenge related to the evolution of the market. As we speak, we will just release today a new observatory. You will find it digitally, but also a document that express and design, in fact, all what is happened in the market, the evolution, the trend, the dynamic, the new players, the actors, what is happening in the cybersecurity, in AI. So you will have all these elements, so I will not make this comment on that. I will focus on a concrete example, because you asked me the question about a concrete example. By my experience, I was running a specific event, which is a school case, which is all the security and the cyber security of the Olympic Games for Paris 2024. And as you know, and there are many friends from America around, next time we'll be in Los Angeles 2026, and after, even in 2030, the Winter Games will be in France. So just very quickly, as a diagnostic, 2 elements, numbers. Because we had the experience as we delivered the games from Barcelona to Paris, an extensive experience of the evolution of the digitalization, which is in homothesia with the risks, the attack, and the cybersecurity threats. And honestly, it exploded around Rio. In Rio, 350 million cyber incidents. In 2021, if you remember, 4.4 billion cyber incidents. In Paris, 2024, 50 billion. So that means that there is, it's not a small growth, it's a cybersecurity incident. The racine, the source of the attack, and will evaluate, in fact, and that's what is changing today, is the geopolitical environment. We have the states, that means, and we know all of them, North Korea, Belarus, Russia, that are quite well trained in trying to destabilize different events, and the Olympic Games is a specific target for that. You have after the criminal, and you have after the activist. Okay, we are in a kind of a war, a battle, asymmetric, and what changed, especially in Paris, aside the number, was the complexity and the typology of the attack. Especially, they were attacks driven by AI technology, and we had to reset completely the design of our security operating center, for example, including AI technology, facing the massive numbers of attacks, and also the new typology, more including AI. Just to give you an image, to be very simple, it's like the attackant, especially the criminals, they were sending like submarine intelligent submarine inside your critical infrastructure, looking at your defense to develop the strategy in real time on how to enter in your system. So we captured this kind of attack. It is called much more advanced than APT today, and I think it will not decline for Los Angeles. You will have a good gift in Los Angeles from our friend criminal and activists, I'm sure. So that means that honestly, AI is becoming very important for the defense because the attack is using this kind of tool. Okay, and if I may give one advice, it's not a lesson, but from our experience, the first thing to do is to somewhere to anticipate. That means really to anticipate, to evaluate, to plan. The second is to innovate. That means that there are 2 years of Los Angeles. There are still some cyber threats that are not known today. We were experiencing that in Paris. And the third thing, which is important for us, and to give you as an advice, is to collaborate. That means you're stronger, and it will be somewhere a message, what was done, given by Despina, is that you cannot do everything alone. You have to collaborate. As an example, what we did in the Olympic Games in Paris 2024 was specifically a good example of cooperation between Europe and US. We are using a lot of solutions from US. I saw here Forscoot, Palo Alto, and so on, and some French and European solution, which is also a good example of what will be the change and what will be the new way of cooperating tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I think everybody can agree with that. And I wanted to go out with concrete recommendations, so you already gave one. Probably more for the American side, but collaboration is crucial, which brings me to the second part we want to discuss. When we've looked on the threat landscape, but we have very different approaches on how to actually address AI changes, both for cyber and both for defense, very different doctrines across the Atlantic. So David, when you would briefly summarize, what is the US approach on this? How would you deal with that? And then we after that, go to you, back to you, Despina, on actually how do you develop a regulation which is efficient, which also enables companies here. We had the perfect example of Mythos, where firstly, just US companies had access, no European company. The German Minister of Digitalization yesterday asked for a European Mythos, yes, but we don't have it. How do we build it? So there's still a very different perception development of AI and an answer to this different threat landscape. And David, how your US perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks, Timo. I think it's a really important question. The majority of these models that we've been talking about here in Europe and in the United States and in the West generally are being developed through technologists based in the United States. They're not all Americans by background, of course. We have a very dynamic culture in the United States of engineering development, and a lot of Europeans are participating in that development of the tech stack, which is really important. And if you look at the leadership of these organizations, many of them are from around the world, and they've come to America. And they're approaching it that these products are not just American products, but they're for the benefit of the world. And so when we think about digital sovereignty and those issues, I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think it's important to recognize just in the first instance, these technologies are not being built just for America. They're being built for the benefit of mankind. The issue that you're raising with respect to AI, I think, which is really important, is how are we governing it and what principles are attached to it in the United States today. As I mentioned, our law comes from common law doctrines following the old UK model. And some of those doctrines, courts are now addressing AI. I mentioned some of the cases, challenging the actual applications and the uses, whether the products are faulty by design, whether they result in privacy violations. There's a lot of cases in the courts right now. Our Congress is seeking to evaluate and adopt legislation associated with AI. Obviously, those things can be challenging in light of our model today with Congress. The White House has issued an AI national security strategy around AI that received a lot of attention here in Europe and the United States. It's helping inform the program. Pursuant to that, NIST has developed standards associated with AI, which are really important. I know some of the conversations yesterday related to ISO, but the NIST standards That's part of the Department of Commerce, the NIST organization, that technology standard setting organization. We've got folks here from the White House and others who can talk a lot about these issues. Is a really important standard. So we've got standard setting going on in addition to White House related initiatives. We've heard, obviously we've already received questions since just arriving around the AI policy that was being drafted from the White House in the executive order, and that's currently being considered interagency, so that's pending. We'll see how that plays out. But I think most importantly, what we know today, and this will I think lead in well with Despina's developments, is that the companies themselves are engaging in bilateral discussions with customers, with counterparties. And those arrangements are contractual in nature, governed by US law, typically. Here in Europe, they could be governed by European law. And those contracts, they are, right? Those contract terms allow for use of, say, Mythos, or Five for, OpenAI's products. And the similar models. We'll leave DeepSeek and some of the other technologies aside and what the Chinese are doing for now and later. But as we think about what those contracts say and how the contracts are governing the use and application of these highly prolific products that can find vulnerabilities at a pace that is faster than our ability to humanly patch them, and from a technology standpoint, patch them, because they find the problem, they don't fix the problem. We still need humans to do that. There still has to be a human in the loop there. Those contractual arrangements are limited, right? Everyone has heard there's 40 plus companies in the United States that have received access to the products contractually to go forth. You've heard comments about $100 million contracts and arrangements in order to have access to it. But we're pushing it out across some of our critical infrastructure through our key players. The good news here is it is not solely limited to US users anymore. And I think just in the last day or so, we've got some really good developments that I'll ask Despina to maybe highlight, or Timo, you can ask her to highlight.
No, over to you, Despina. Your thoughts on all these aspects. Very easy question.
Yes, well, okay. So let's now come to the crux of it. It is very interesting to hear what AI experts say about the deployment of these models and what cybersecurity experts say. The first thing I did when all these models started being announced was to create a task force inside the commission between our AI office and the cybersecurity team, together with our cybersecurity agency, because we're like, well, we have to put all our minds together. And I saw the difference in the approach. And when you speak to AI experts, they tell you, we knew these models were coming, some of them were there, they were not as capable, we're going to deal with it, relaxed. And then you'd speak to cybersecurity experts, and the first question is exactly what David said. So how are we going to patch all these vulnerabilities we're going to identify? Is it possible to go as fast patching? So this is the inertia of the cybersecurity world. Immediately you look at the negative and the weakness and the vulnerability and how to deal with it. Now, we have a number of issues. The first is that indeed all these companies are from the US, and all big tech has come from the US to Europe. It has always been like that. That's not a problem. But of course, it gives a certain privilege as to how they decide to deal with Europe. Absolutely. But Europe is always very open. How a company decides to release their products is absolutely their privilege. So we couldn't tell one or the other, I don't like to always mention the brand, how to deploy them. But now in Europe, we do have legislation about how you deploy. We have an AI Act, and I must say that what you described happening in the US resembles the approach of the AI Act. The AI Act was adopted a couple of years ago, and it was a bit of an issue. Is it going to impede innovation? Is it going to be an obstacle? Well, there you go. The AI Act allows us an oversight, and as of this coming August, we will also have enforcement powers at EU level. Large models have to be notified to the European Commission and scrutinized. And all these issues around privacy that were mentioned and what have you have to be verified, because you cannot breach other laws either with these models. So the EU is equipped, at least for the deployment, with the AI Act. And not only, because we also have the Cyber Resilience Act that will enter into force at the end of 2027, which obliges manufacturers to meet security by design. So these models will have to be also secure by themselves, which addresses the big question, what if they are uptaken by malicious actors? So the European legislation is already a shield as to how we do the security of the deployment of the models. And I must tell you that I have seen a lot of respect from tech companies for that framework. A lot of respect. They comply. So this is already a good start. And that has to do with the regulatory part. Now let's go to the commercial part and the more practical part. Indeed, there is an interest for all critical infrastructure operators to have access to these models. Also in Europe, absolutely. Now, let's take the story of Mythos, because the story of Mythos, you know, in Greek, Mythos is a story. So if we take that example, the company decided for a measured rollout, very responsible of them. Number of actors, some of them disclosed, some of them undisclosed. The question was that going to stay only on the other side of the Atlantic? It was going to reach Europe one way or another through the clients of these companies, because all the big tech companies were part of it. So we decided to take a very sober approach and work together with the companies that deploy these models, see whether they have considered the European legislative framework, see what these models are capable of, and most of all, see what they intend to do with the mitigating measures that are needed to be there to cover either malicious activity, but also how to deal with patching vulnerabilities. How do you intend to deal with that if you're faced with an incredible situation of so many vulnerabilities identified that it is impossible to patch them? And we also discuss the positive things, because of course, it is a big game changer with these models in the market. We are able to go much faster. It partially addresses a skills issue we had, because we can find the people we didn't have actually through the models. And of course, it is much better for the threat landscape, absolutely. So there are some benefits we also discussed. So we took this incremental approach, this sober approach, and we arrived at a very good understanding. And now, yes, we have achieved to be in a discussion as to how we will access, if we access the models. Because I come now to the third part, and I will answer also on the European Mythos question. I won't be shy about it. The third is, okay, access is not just about the access. Under what terms? These models are very capable models, but how do you test them? Where do you test them? What do they have access to? So the terms and conditions of their access is also something that is very important, and it is what Europe is going to be looking at. As you probably know, they are now making the access available to more and more organizations, and that will certainly include European organizations and the European Cybersecurity Agency. We welcome all that, but access is not just unconditional. We need to see how. These models can also be very expensive. So you also need to look how are you going to democratize these models. In Europe, 90% of the cybersecurity industry is SMEs. They can't all buy these large models. What are you going to do? You're going to tell them, well, you know, tough luck. This is where enter the European Mythos. We have had projects in the past where joint undertakings, the European Union have produced big enterprises in certain sectors. In tech, this is a very challenging game. What we're trying to do in Europe is offer capacity. Offer capacity. This is what we did with our AI factories. And as you know, we're now launching the AI gigafactories. Our aim will be for you to have access also in capacity in Europe. We're not looking at competing with what is out there commercially. That's for the companies to decide. Maybe eventually some joint ventures will be deployed, who knows. But until then, what we need is the trust. I was very impressed with the number of clients of these models who approached us to tell us about their experience, which shows there is a trust to Europe and a trust to our oversight mechanisms, because they offer guardrails in case something goes wrong. So through that, you also have already a new game that is created, a new collaboration, a fantastic and very solid public-private partnership. So I think the one thing one has to do is just take it slow, step by step. We will have to develop our own capabilities. You know that our executive vice president, Mrs. Hanna Virkunen, had a debate in the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago, because of course our European Parliament is also very concerned, what about access, what about Europe, what is happening? And we were very outspoken in that we have already legislation in Europe, and it will be about how to implement it, but we need to look at capabilities, and that is something we will have to be more creative about, and this is why we announced this action plan on cybersecurity and AI that will come from the European Commission in the coming weeks, let's say, and that will put together things that are simple and existing, but how do we deploy them for AI?
Thank you very much. Extensive
I hope I
answer.
was not too long, but
David,
David asked me to address all, so.
David, you want to briefly reflect on that? Otherwise, we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a really important announcement.
You can be critical.
No, I won't be critical. I think it's a very important announcement that we came into Paris, many of us who were traveling in, knowing that the conversations were occurring. It's obviously just hit the media in the last 24 hours that Despina's team and the Enisa team are now going to have access to Mythos.
Yes,
it's a powerful statement of collaboration, going back to our colleague's point, and how we're going to proceed going forward. Look, as the technologists can communicate and collaborate around these issues, and the policy folks can also engage in setting the normative standards, we're not going to have the same views all the time on what the normative control should be in the contract, what the normative control should be by the regulator. But we can share the technology and work through those details in non-harmonized or non-homogenized regimes. And that's an important outcome for like-minded allies. France is America's oldest ally, England being our special relationship. We need to be able to work through these issues and work through them effectively and efficiently and in a timely way. The only comment I would make that differs from my dear colleague and friend is that I think we need to move quickly here in Europe. I think the Europeans really need to help define some of these principles to get these tools deployed as rapidly as possible. The difference between our ability to discover and the adversary's ability to exploit that discovery is very significant now, and time to patch is still slow. You're seeing just the data that we know from being in the trench on these issues. Thousands of vulnerabilities are being identified that we can't even patch, and that information is beginning to percolate out as we're seeing. And so I think there is this element of speed that matters, or I think as we refer to it, velocity, speed in a given direction, and hopefully we're going to travel that journey together.
Speed matters. Staying a bit still on this question of the transatlantic different approach, Danielle, from your perspective, we had a few years ago the French president saying, or giving the vision of l'Europe qui protège. And this reflects on many different aspects, but one of them is, of course, sovereignty in so many ways, digital sovereignty in many ways. So when you work with your companies, you gave the example of the Olympic Games, but from really breaking down to a company perspective, what does digital sovereignty mean? Can you actually be able to build or increase sovereignty in Europe? And how do you address this issue in working with key US security suppliers, data storage suppliers that Europe simply, at least yet, for now, doesn't have?
We like very much when our president is delivering speeches like this. And as a matter of fact, and very simply, the industries, the companies, they need stability, visibility, somewhere to make business. Every time when it is instability, problem for company, wherever it is, in which country. So concerning, I would say, focus on the problematic of we have also large company like Thales, Capgemini in France, I'm speaking. They are operating all over the world. And so they are experiencing what is happening in different markets, Asia, US, China, and Europe. And definitively, I would say that we are experiencing three space. We'll not talk too much about the Chinese space. It's very specific, okay? But definitively, he is not defending this that we are in the two other spaces that are Europe and US. Our raw evaluation about in US, it's more, I would say, freedom. There is no inhibition concerning the technologies, innovation, and so on. Is let's say a little jungle somewhere. And the best can win if he's the best. In Europe, there is another approach, it was designed also Despina, is that we believe that AI is host technology, and you will see that there is another one battle that will arrive, which is quantum, as an impact on the society. And even there are some deputy member of parliament in the room. Before, there were no elector coming to them saying, okay, what is happening with internet, with, you know, it become a political. It's entering not only AI, but all the digitalization is entering in the political agenda today. And we have to take into account this phenomena. And Europe chose, in one way, I would say not only regulation, but to regulate. And it was not the choice of, we are seeing that. We are not against regulation, but the regulations have to be simple, especially for the startups, you know, they have not so much time to move. So it's important for them to know the rules of the games, to have visibility, and it's stable. That means the regulation. But we have regulation. And we don't oppose, as an industry, regulation and innovation. We are, not only us, but operating in some sectors that are highly regulated. I will give you 2 examples only. Aeronautics. Aeronautics, we cannot say that it's not regulated. It's highly regulated. And it doesn't prevent innovation for new planes and so on. And the second is nuclear.
I'm not sure if this, with giving the FCAS debate, is the case, but yeah.
Well, there are new aircraft every day. Enfin, not every day, but effectively, the thermodynamic of the product and the innovation in our industry in digital is much more, I think, in speed than in other, let's say, sector. But the second sector is nuclear. In nuclear, and we need innovation, and there are innovation in nuclear. So don't oppose regulation and innovation. But it has to be clear for everyone. The rules of the game, we are playing the same sport to avoid perturbation, deviation of the competition. That's what we believe and that we request for as an industry.
Jacob, first, would you agree on that? But second, also, I mean, from your time as Minister of Economic Affairs, now with the Danish Chamber of Commerce, Denmark, we talked about Copenhagen Business School before, is also a startup ecosystem. There are very prospering AI companies developing, but they all act under these different regulations. They have the threat landscape, which is evolving, and they want to scale up. Usually you go to the US. Yeah. So how do you approach that from a private sector view?
I think many of concerns that we have been addressed, but as you say, we have a saying, the Danish Chamber of Commerce, we need more Pegasus, less Pegasi and more unicorns. We want to make more big businesses, we don't want them to fly across the Atlantic. I trembled on that, sorry about that. Well, the Americans, they are faster. They are a lot faster. And as you say, David, we need speed in Europe. We're very good at regulating, yes. And we always have that sentence, we're not against regulation, but if we could at least have the same regulation. I mean, we have a European legislation, then we have 27 different approaches to that legislation. Mahatma Gandhi was once asked, how do you feel about Western civilization? And he answered, that would be a good idea. That's how I feel about the single market. What a great idea. What a wonderful idea it would be for Europe if we actually had a single market, if we had a set of rules to work on, if we had the speed that they do in the US. It's not only about legislation, it's also about financing. The ability to attract financing for these types of companies is much bigger in the US. Also, not only because of the amount of money you put in, but also because of the ability to bring together the people making the decision the first time. In our wonderful continent, yes, where we legislate, we meet, the first meeting, we sit there and we say, oh, this is an interesting idea. Let's bring together for the next meeting some other people who may be able to take a decision on this. They don't do that in the US. They bring together the right people in the first meeting and they make a decision and they move forward. It may be a cultural thing, but it's something that we can learn from. And they give out problems from a governmental point of view. Instead of saying, we need this solution, they say, we have this problem. That is something we need to learn. But we are very scared here in Europe to make mistakes, because politics in Europe is often driven by finding out who made the mistake instead of who had the brilliant idea. That keeps the ideas pressured down. And it's not because we need to, yes, we do need to compete with the US, because competition is good. Competition is always good. But it's not a question of either American or European. It's a question of both American and European. But we need to have the competition, we need to have the choice, and we need to speed up, and we need to not slow down our regulation, but at least regulate as fast as the technology develops. And we don't do that for the time being. So when Danish companies have to move out in the European market and meet 27 different sets of rules, it's a jungle to move out in. So they move to the US, where the decisions are made, where the financing is, and where the legislation is easier to understand. We need to do something about it.
We're entering the last 10 minutes of our discussion, but there's one topic I really wanted to touch upon, and that's... Yeah, well, okay, I thought it will be a long reply. But no, please, Despina, take a few sentences if you want to react on that. Yeah.
Because, you know, as I said, we're polymorphic in Europe, and we are pluralistic. So this is one view of Europe. Let me give you another view of Europe from the inside, the European institutions, which comes from the examples I cited earlier. The moment Mythos was launched with exclusive access to US companies, we had a number of those companies come to talk to us. If we didn't have a single market, they wouldn't have done it. If we didn't have a single market, we wouldn't have a European cybersecurity agency managed by all the member states. And ESA is not just a standalone organization. It is managed by the Commission with 27 member states and vice versa. So
maybe Despina, before we get too much into this debate, very concretely the question, I mean, the question of speed still is often a challenge for companies.
Look at the speed. We had the AA Act. Today in the US, they're the same. Who was faster?
And we have so
we are very, very interconnected.
As someone said last night at the lovely dinner that Sebastian held, you know, the Americans have showed up in the suitcases full. I think one of the points that you raise, and I think we left off his resume also, Secretary of Defense. I think one of the things the FT raises this morning starkly for those who have seen below the fold are just some radical numbers. This year, one of the three foundational model companies has generated almost $50 billion in revenue. 50 billion. There are companies and countries represented in this room that is a multi-year GDP number for those countries. Two, the valuations of those three companies are all over $1 trillion. One of them is close to 2 trillion, and SpaceX is at 1.75 trillion, close to 2 trillion, because they've rolled up their XAI platform, their X payment platform, along with their space platform into one company. The idea that a single European company, let alone many European companies at the ECVC level, the startup level, the VC level, and private equity level, are going to reach that scale in the time frame, to your excellent point, we just haven't seen that. And this isn't American hegemony I'm talking about, it's just practical financing. We just haven't seen that trend. And I think what we're suggesting collectively, dear friend, is that we, in order to ensure that that Western view is carried with our friends and allies here in Europe, which is essential, I think, to our collective national security and interests around the world, we have to share at speed, we have to move at speed, we have to come up with a collective mindset. We can differ on our norms and some of our regulations. Hopefully we can streamline that as much as possible and harmonize them where we can, recognize that we're going to have differences. But we have to face the fact that the technology is going to rapidly evolve with massive amounts of capital, and that is occurring, and will occur. All three tenses for this generation.
Despina.
So, again, I agree. It's not about creating the same model here in Europe. That may or may not happen. We've done it in other sectors, and it may or may not happen. And that will be a geopolitical decision of the European Union at the level of all the heads of state. But in the meantime, we are complementary, because I think our regulations have proven that you cannot just unroll and deploy these models unguarded, and that now people are looking at how to guard them. So I think there is a complementarity. I think in Europe there is a lot of interest because our legislation does so that our critical infrastructure operators perform much better when it comes to the level of vulnerabilities that they're faced with. Because of NIS2, because we have one that imposes on all of them to meet the highest levels of cybersecurity, and there is enforcement by governments. It's not yet at the right level, but it is happening as they're implementing the rules. And that makes us a really, really good customer at the same time. You know, so there is an economic interest, if I may say so. Because yes, maybe we don't have the models, maybe we do not have the companies with the trillions of revenue, but we have the customers, and we have solid customers, exactly because of the single market. Because our customers are not busy, I disagree with you if you allow me, meeting 27 different sets of rules. There's one set of rules and they just go about their business without having to care about what do you do when you cross a border. So I think that's already an advantage for Europe, and it's an economic interest for our US counterparts, because we are one market. It is that one market that makes us very interesting for all these US companies.
Jacob, 20-second answer.
Yeah, sorry. I knew that the one single market remark was going to be provocative, and it was intentionally so. We need to improve our common market because it is not good enough, it is not strong enough. If it was, we would be able to keep the companies here, and we can't. And we cannot just be customers in this American store. I mean, Denmark is the Microsoft user country #1, and we're very happy about it. But we need to have a plan B. We need to have a plan. Even Microsoft says so. And we need to have something else. We need to be able to shop around. That's not either or, it's both and. And as we talked about earlier, well, we've been granted to mythos. Why, thank you so much. We cannot just sit here as Europeans and say, oh, let's wait until our great big brother in the US allows us access. We cannot wait for that because it's not very predictable. Forgive me for saying this a little bluntly. We still love you guys.
We feel the same way. Can I just add one other last comment?
You can have that, but in a second.
Yeah.
So we're entering the last round of statements. No, maybe in
You have the capability to answer. Last voice, in conclusion.
No,
Yes?
not the last voice. Everybody has 30 final seconds, but because the room is so full of experts that there are other panels which will follow up. But a conclusion from your side first, and then we move step by step.
Okay. Ici, we see the speech, and it's not new somewhere, but there is an elephant in the room. In fact, in one hand, Europe is regulating. The Americans think that Europe is regulating to avoid competition. And in the meantime, 80% of the market in Europe is made by American companies in digital. It's the only sector where it is like this. In other sectors, you have 20% of market share, 30% sometime, in petrol, for example. But in digital, it's a real unbalanced situation. I was going to Washington 3 times, and always I have the same message. At one point of time, as digital is not like, let's say, Apple, fruit, or clothes. It is a sector
we got the point.
Which has some means related to the society, the way of living, and so on. And Americans has to understand that at one point of time, we have to rebalance in Europe the situation concerning the technology and the sovereignty of what you were discussing just before and asking for.
Sovereign point, perfect. We go over to you. Jacob, what is the biggest European AI achievement? To have a positive twist.
That's a good question. I hope it's yet to be seen because we still have some catching up to do to our American friends. But this shows very clearly that it's not a question of either or, it's a question of both and. And we need to have this strong collaboration across the Atlantic, and we need to keep that also when it comes to this. But Europe needs, forgive the expression, more tech energy. And the only way we can do that is to move faster.
Let's go to David, so the European Commission can have the last word.
Yeah, I think the importance of the transatlantic relationship obviously is borne out on this panel, and I think it will be throughout the day, and we should carry that forward. Last point is, the topic of this panel was AI-driven cyber conflicts. There's one area we did not discuss, and my closing remark will focus on that, and that is there are keepers of this order beyond the regulators and beyond the technologists. There are the law enforcement officers and agents that collaborate routinely between the United States, Europe, and our Five Eyes countries, and then beyond. And they are doing day-to-day very hard work of not only investigating, but also holding people and systems accountable. And I know there's going to be a separate discussion later in the day around this, but the collaboration and cooperation in that space is essential. And so as we struggle with the technology and we struggle with whether or not our norms should be the same, let's not struggle with at least one thing. When it comes to law enforcement, let's collaborate when we enforce the laws around this.
And we had a panel even without discussing Chinese actors. Despina, the last words of this panel, over to you.
Well, I think that's exactly right. We see now that the way the market is doing this by itself on this very topical issue of AI and the game changer for cybersecurity, because I'd like to stick to that. We have to work together. There's an interest of like-minded. You mentioned the elephants in the room. There are other elephants in the room. And we shouldn't be fighting because we've always been like-minded. There is an interdependence and interconnection. Yes, the technology, the market, the economies, the geopolitical like-mindedness. The EU and the US will stop being allies, I hope, for as long as I live. So I think that we need to surf on that. I think we need to take that wave that is coming. It is an opportunity for the security of Europe, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. I think now we're sitting here, yeah, is there a single market? Yes, the elephant's in the room. Oh, yes, well, you're not very fast. We've got technology. I think all that is a fantastic and very healthy debate that we've been having for years. What matters is that we put ourselves together for the security of our economies, of our people, of our values, because this is what we're talking about at the end of the day. And that's my last point.
That was the first highlight of the Paris Cyber Summit. There are many more to follow. So thank you so much for a very vivid discussion this morning. So I think we managed the expectation well. And Sebastian, back to you and to the next panel.